mouthful. Like I said, we're going to cover quite a few things. But like any journey, we're going to start kind of small and build our way up to it. It's meant to be kind of interactive. You should see there's a little Q&A panel there built into your GoToMeeting applet. You can feel free to ask those questions. If it's a broader topic, I can save those to the end. If it's a specific question, I'll stop and answer it as it happens. So let's just jump right in. All right, quick little agenda here. Like I said, we're going to cover a myriad of things. Go over a quick overview of our company very quickly there, and we're going to jump right into some common exploits, how to avoid them, how we actually exploit those for customers who engage us in a vulnerability assessment or penetration testing model, and using our service that is designed to locate those and exploit those and then document those and make recommendations. So we're going to go over those and all the data that our advanced security team has collected over the years. Some things you need to hear about there. We're going to get into our true risk management model and how to avoid those, how to manage those risks that you're going to come up against, and then apply some of our processes, and then eventually we're going to look at some solutions or the characteristics of a good solution set that you can integrate together that has something we call contextual awareness, and I'll get into what that means, and we'll talk about next steps. First of all, like I said, though, quick little bit about us. We were established in 1991. Just celebrated about 24 years, I believe, here in January. We were privately owned that entire time. We're constantly recruiting, but only look for that top talent and expertise. We like to establish ourselves as thought leaders in our spaces, and there are many of those. We're going to talk about that in a little while. We definitely are one of the coolest places to work. We like to think so, but Cranes seems to agree with us. We have one of those banners in our lobby. We're very proud of it. We have a very deep history with a consultative or advisory approach. We don't lead with solutions, we lead with questions. And we ask a lot of them in the beginning in our engagements, and you're going to see that come through in our presentation here as well. We're very active, finally, in our communities. We're very involved in our charities. We actually have one of our own called the Detroit Area Rescue Team that our CEO and President Steve Browning established several years ago. And we have those where we actually are located throughout the country. So let's start off with IT risk management in general, okay? This is a slide that you'll see kind of repeat. There's a theme to it. I'm going to draw this one out first. And at the core of it, you can see it's all about your data, your intellectual property, your reputation, your brand, and everything that makes your organization, right? Quite honestly, it's the reason that your companies exist is to be unique and provide service and make money and be competitive in your markets. That means a lot, and obviously it's very important. From an IT perspective, we're going to be talking about how people are trying to get at that, how they're trying to impact that brand or your intellectual property and take it and use it for their own or hold it hostage or make life harder for you, not just from a malicious perspective, but we're talking about the accidents that happen every day. People delete things, remove things, they loan things to people they shouldn't loan to, they email, they copy onto removable media, they mean to do good, but they're really actually kind of going against the principles of good risk management. And we'll talk about those as well, not just what you read in the news. And we're going to talk about this slide. There'll be a repeating theme. We're going to get back to this. The thing I want to point out, though, here is CBI has built this model because we actually address every one of these at these different layers for risk management. We can speak to them. We can implement those solutions, integrate those with others, and it's that contextual aware model that we've built, meaning it isn't just one piece of the puzzle. We know how they all fit together and how they're actually governed and run by operations and how you need all of these components for successful risk management. Just to kind of get that going as a primer. Again, we're going to get back to that slide a couple times. Let's start off with a simple question, though, to kind of frame things up. Okay, there is one thing that's drawing all of us together here today, regardless of where you're at in the org chart, how long you've been there, your time in the industry, whatever, is that we, in one way, shape, or form, we manage risk. Okay, we do it differently. Some of you do it financial management of risk. Some of you do it operational. Some are technical management of risk. But we all have risk management in our DNA, and that's one of the reasons we're here today to talk about this. So having said that, if we are all managing risk, We need to be looking for ways to identify it. What is a risk? What is not a risk? What's high? What's medium? What's low? Okay, prioritizing that, minimizing it, obviously, eliminating where possible, and then putting those things in place that are actually going to drive improvement in the programs that are designed to help us do those things. It's all about governance and documenting what you do and putting it into good practice, right? So now we kind of frame that all up. You kind of know about us, our history, what we can do in a contextual aware model that we have. We call it our framework of capabilities. Let's kind of start and jump right in. First, let's talk about the usual suspects. This is that part that I mentioned earlier where people are trying to impact your brand, your intellectual property. They want it, not so much for the actual content in some cases. They just want it because they know it causes you pain and maybe can help your competitors in some way, shape, or form. But the usual suspects. As much as I give this presentation, I always like to go back and validate it that it's still relevant and it's current. And as much as I can tell from the feedback I get from the industry that we're in, password deficiencies remain still very much relevant as a topic of discussion in form of risk management. As simple as it sounds, it's definitely worth mentioning here in a risk management presentation, okay? How we go about exploiting them, though, might be something new to you. Again, our advanced security team, they perform vulnerability assessments and penetration testing on a regular basis. Over the last several years, they've gathered a lot of intelligence and a lot of ways of doing and going about what they do, and they've kind of streamlined this process. We can't get in, we can't do much of anything unless we have someone's password. So this kind of goes through how we harvest it, how we get those, and how we identify patterns over the years. You might notice some of these either with your own passwords or maybe within the organizations that you've worked for. Nonetheless, there are patterns, and they're pretty predictable, and they almost lead to success when we're actually trying to exploit a password deficiency of some kind. As simple and old school and boring as it might sound, it truly does work, and it leads to lots of other really bad things down the road. So the way it works is we're going to do what we call a recount of harvesting some email addresses. It's very simple. For example, you signed up for our webinar, and I got your email address simply enough because in most cases you provided it. I can go on the internet, I can get your domain name, and I can piece together pretty much very quickly the pattern. It's first initial, last name, @something.com. Okay, that's pretty easy to do. If you give me a business card, I have what I need to start the journey. Okay. Then we go and we're going to start identifying the weak spots in that perimeter. So if you remember that rainbow model that I had on the screen a minute ago, the top one was perimeter. We're at that layer at this point. You most likely have a way of getting your email remotely. Most organizations do nowadays. Sometimes it's hosted on a website. Sometimes it's integrated into your email exchange servers or Lotus Note servers or whatever mail services you may actually have. There's actually a portal out there somewhere. And we identify those, and it's usually like mail@something.com or some kind of version of that. We generally have an easy time of finding that. So now we know your email address, and we know where the door is, okay? But we don't have a real good way of validating passwords. That's the part that's coming up. We validate your name contacts through social engineering, so that first initial last name thing that I mentioned. We call, we ask, we get business cards, we listen in conversations, whatever it might be. We look at printouts that have been discarded or that are available on the internet. Some way we actually find that context, and it's, again, very easy to do. We identifying those lockout thresholds. We assume that if we try to log on unsuccessfully a number of times within a given time frame, like a minute or two or 5 minutes or whatever, it's going to lock us out. We don't want that to happen because it does several things. Slows us down, and it also trips an event that is something that you might notice, meaning you'll hear us knocking on the door, and we don't want you to notice that. So we're going to be very careful about not triggering one of those account lockout thresholds, and we assume that there is one. And again, that's very easy to do. We have all the time in the world. Something to point out there about time is the people who want to go in and get things that they shouldn't be able to get have something that you don't have, or something we all don't have, is the unlimited amount of time it takes to get that done. We have a finite amount of time. We're constantly working on deadlines. You can't focus on monitoring events or securing your network and being at all places at all times. So they take advantage of that. Okay, it's an obvious Achilles heel, and we have to address that. And we do here in the presentation. Finally, we do attempts. Okay, we have emails, we have common passwords that are used all the time. We continue knocking on the door in strategic fashion until we gain access of some kind. Okay. I should also point out that in almost all cases, we're successful. Eventually, we get to the next step, which is this. Okay. But before we do, something worth pointing out here is in those organizations that have gone through this simple, cost-effective, easy process of implementing a two-factor authentication, makes our lives a lot harder, and it's going to make the lives of those would-be hackers a lot harder as well. Okay, two-factor authentication, obviously, the theory is something you have, something you know, and it slows us down because it puts that stopgap in gathering passwords and using patterns that are common at a severe disadvantage. It doesn't work anymore, okay, or doesn't work like it normally does. Bad news for large organizations is we're usually very, very successful, 95+% success rates in larger organizations simply because there's more targets. The target-rich environment, eventually we're going to get in because there's a lot more email addresses and attempts that we can take. Smaller organizations, obviously it's going to be a little bit harder. Okay? Unless you have monitoring in place. So think about your ability to monitor something as simple as someone trying to log on and they're doing it unsuccessfully. It might actually be an employee who's forgotten his password and he does it 3 times in 2 minutes and he locks himself out. Who's monitoring that event? How many times can you remember where someone proactively in your IT department reached out to an employee and said, listen, I see that you locked yourself out because I'm monitoring this screen. I'll go ahead and unlock you or take care of your issue as quickly as possible. That doesn't happen because we simply don't have the time and resources to do that to that level of service. It's not going to happen. Okay? So if you have monitoring in place, the thing that it does create, though, is a trail, okay, a forensical trail that we can go back in time and look at and see, is there a pattern of people logging in unsuccessfully or unsuccessful attempts from a script or a hacker or a former employee or a competitor, the list goes on, okay? So you need to think about what you can do as far as doing forensical analysis for event management. Basically, the process goes this way. We've got a username. We have a password or 2 or 3 that we found that worked. Okay, again, we've gone through hundreds or thousands of attempts at this point. The odds are pretty good that we're going to get 1, 2, or even 3 accounts that do let us in to the front door. And that's all we care about at this point. And once we get in, you can see the diagram down below. First thing we do is we go after this thing called the global address list. It exists in almost any environment and has a lot of different formats, but essentially it's the card catalog. It's the index to the entire phone book of your organization. And it validates usernames. It validates that they exist, that they're there, and it gives us a whole lot more of things to try, okay, instead of just the ones that we were able to gather through social engineering or what have you. So then we actually repeat that attack methodology you saw on the last slide against that global address list, and we increase the number of logons that are successful, and we kind of stop. We stop now, and we pick up again later on in time, because we do not want to trigger any unwanted attention to what we're actually doing. Okay. At the same time, we're looking for those VPN remote access portals as well. Okay. Your organizations, and most of those are going to have access for administrators to log on through a secure portal, an encrypted portal sometime, and do administrative work on the back end. We're trying those doors now as well, and we're expanding our scope of exploitability as we go along. We're finding more doors in the house, not just trying the front one. We're looking for that internal network vulnerabilities. Once we get in and we're on the very first server, all we need to do is execute some scripts that are very simple and well known in the industry. That server then would report back to us a little bit of information, but it's worth its weight in gold. It would report back, for example, what operating system are you using? What version? Is it patched? Do you have exploits that are known for that particular operating system that we can exploit? And that gets us to the next step. We compromise the internal first layer of your perimeter of your network, and we actually start gaining access to the beginning of intellectual property, of some information. It might be just information about employees, but it's the start. And once we have a crack in the dam, it's easy to wedge in there and open it up a little bit bigger. Before we move on, we also apply the same exact level of harvesting on social media as well. So why stop at the corporate side when we can go to Facebook, we can go to LinkedIn, and get all the information we need about that individual, individuals in the company, in the organization, how they work, friends, family. We're looking for personal banking information. We're looking for lots of things that we can use to make that person's life a lot harder. So it's expanding into the social networking area as well. So let's talk about how we get there, the portals and the doors. I talked about finding the doors a few times. Generally, those doors technically take physical shape in the form of a website or a web portal, or there's some kind of application that's being hosted on a website that we're trying to gain access to. Well, now we're increasing that landscape. Obviously, mobile operating systems are prevalent. They're increasing exponentially every single year. We have lots more mobile devices than we ever have had, and it's going to be obviously a trend that will increase. Web and mobile applications, dynamic remote workforce. I want what I want, when I want, how I want it, right? So how do we support all that but keep the security and risk low, risk management rather, vectors low enough to provide that service without denying them the flexibility of, giving them what they want when they want it in the format that they want it. It's a balancing act, and it's very tricky sometimes. But websites will continue to be a pinch point, and they'll be an exploitable thing that we can take advantage of for quite some time. Okay, they're very vulnerable, and we go after that soft spot. So speaking about website vulnerabilities, and another common one, again, I know it's 2014, passwords we just talked about. It's pretty traditional. SQL injections, again, been around for a very long time, but it continues to be #1 on our list of things we try and are very successful at exploiting when we're paid to perform vulnerability assessments and penetration testing for our clients. It's almost the very first thing we try, and we're almost always successful in doing it in one way, shape, or form. And there's lots of reasons why. We're going to talk about that. It might just not be negligence. Sometimes it's designed specifically for a reason because you have to do it this way, which sets yourself up for a vulnerability because the manufacturer or vendor have not been able to deal with some kind of technical issue. So you're at risk for a while, but it's vendor-based risk and a little bit out of your control. We understand that, but it's also something that we take advantage of. So SQL injection, for those who haven't seen a technical version of one or understand it to the point where it makes sense in the context of this presentation, I'll go over this very quickly. There's a logon screen that you're presented with. We see them all the time. You go to a web portal, give me your ID and your password. A lot of people don't know that that login ID field can also contain or accept certain kinds of commands. And we can inject a SQL script or a command, hence the name SQL injection, into the logon field and have it return vital information back to us that lets us get to the next step, okay, in the vulnerability assessment or pen test. Okay, so once we inject that script into the logon screen or a prompt of any kind, and it returns back some kind of result, we know more than we did a minute ago. So we'll take that and we'll actually blend that into a cross-site script. Cross-site scripting attack is also very common, been around for a long time, but they're still really relevant in the industry, and we exploit them all the time. So we'll take, we'll use a browser of choice, and we'll take the information we got from that SQL injection, okay, that it returned back to us, and we'll go to your company's website, and we'll inject an actual script at the end of that URL. Okay, we do these all the time, every day, but you can also inject scripts that execute commands to that website and have it return something back to us, or display something on the screen of the server itself, or send an email or an alert. Anything we really much can think of, we pretty much can do at this point. In this case, we're actually just displaying, a prompt that we can make appear on the actual server in your data center, and we can have this say anything. Okay, and once that person has logged on to the server, they see the actual information on the screen. They click the button. We're now executing that script under their name, and we're using their credentials and their access privileges. The odds are pretty good that's going to be an administrator of some kind, and through them and their ID, we are going to execute a script which gets us even further into the organization. So it's about rights escalation at this point, and we're piggybacking on other individuals' credentials once we do gain access into the environment. And again, we can let that script sit there for months, weeks, days, whatever it is, until someone comes along and recognizes it and just clicks on something arbitrarily, and they actually execute our script for us. The last one I want to mention here as far as websites, it's a big one, and consider your organization and how you may leverage content management systems, okay? A lot of times organizations are in the business of doing what they do well, and they will not take on the burden of building content on a website, you know, a blog, posting information, managing content, all of that stuff. That might not be your specialty. You offshore that, or you give it to another organization to do for you. WordPress is a big one. A lot of exploits there. You're putting your content and your data in the care of someone else, another organization. And it's just as susceptible to vulnerabilities and attacks as if it were in your own data center. So a lot of these content management systems are considered targets for us and others when we're going after intellectual property and your brand. The last one is the easiest one of all, and it probably always will be. We, humans, are lazy. We're creatures of habit. We get into ruts. We forget to do things. And through that aspect of social engineering, we're able to prey on people's willingness to want to do good and help others. Okay, we all are good people at the end of the day, and if someone comes along and is in need of help, or at least pretends to know what they're talking about, and they can manipulate well enough, they can get information from most people pretty easy. That's what social engineering is all about, the manipulation of people to perform things and divulge information to us that get us to our goal or deeper into the organization. They have a lot of different names. Of course, we've heard a lot of them. You know, phishing attacks, both on phone, email, general harvesting, the physical, tailgating, piggybacking, that is walking into areas where we don't belong and seeing things we shouldn't see, using diversionary tactics. Something as simple as walking into the lobby of a building where the person behind that first desk of contact is also performing other functions within the organization, because they're not greeting people all day. They have another job. They're doing certain things administratively, and they sometimes will have something like a printer right there on their desk. They print something internally for someone, and it sits on the printer tray for a while, and all we need to do is maybe perhaps grab that piece of paper or look at it to gain a little bit of intel. A little bit of information is all we need to start that fire. Okay, so things like that we're talking about when we talk about physical infiltration and tailgating. Baiting, that's deploying that malware disguised as an actual image. And this is actually something that's been around for quite a while, but it's something that we leverage quite a bit. That is embedding a script or virus or some form of malware, a botnet, polymorphic virus, what have you, in the actual data layers of an image. Okay, we're hiding it in between the lines of the image you're looking at on the screen. You download the image in an email perhaps, and it's too late. The script is actually executed because you allowed it to be downloaded on your machine, and the script is not executing. So being able to detect those as well. Okay, by far, phishing attack retains the #1 status as far as the actual attack vector for hackers and for us, indeed, when we actually are doing VAs and pen tests. Take a quick moment here to see if anybody's got their. All right, not seeing any questions at this point. That's okay. We're still covering some content here, some fresh content. So what we find, and this is kind of how we actually exploit specific social engineering attack. There's a little bit more to it than what there appears to be. You may have seen an email similar to this. It appears to be legit. It's formatted exactly the way your internal company emails look because, again, social engineering, we gathered that intel. We know exactly what the header footer looks like. We know what your disclaimers look like. It's all easy to get. I can make an email look like it came from the CEO and president with very little effort. Okay? It's a well-known process, and you can do that easily. So this email basically reads like it's coming from someone internal to you, and the name actually might be legit. Remember, we have a global address list, and I can put this username, password, or username rather, his valid email address, phone number is all accurate and everything, because we have now gathered more intel. We're just looking at expanding our footprint at this point. So you get this email, you read it. Basically, it's asking you to click on a URL right here, which is legit. If you click on it, you're going to go to a website that looks exactly like your company's web-based email portal, for example, or it could be an SAP portal or an ERP portal, whatever it is, because we've already captured the images off of that website server in our first round of attacks. We've created our own domain, okay? And basically what we're doing there is, we'll use CBI as an example. Instead of www.cbihome.com, we created a domain called cblhome.com, which when capitalized looks exactly the same. You can't tell the difference. The I's and the L's all basically blend together. So we'll do the same thing with your company's website. Make a new domain that's very similar, maybe one character off, maybe the O's been substituted for a 0. And we now have a new domain with an image of what appears to be a legitimate website that you use all the time. So when you click on it, you're taken to that. Okay? You're taken to our fake domain website. It's asking you to log on. Well, the prompt pops up like it normally does for a username and password. You enter it in as the instructions in the email has indicated. Okay? And then what you're doing is giving us your username and your password. You're giving us the credentials. What we do on the back end, though, without you seeing it, is we log you in legitimately to your actual portal. The next thing you see is the application or your email, your inbox, and it all looks familiar and legitimate. So you are not thinking, well, maybe this was a hoax, or maybe I've been duped or been tricked into going somewhere I shouldn't have gone. Life goes on as normal, and there's no recorded event at all, period. Okay? Everything looks normal. You log on, and you've done your part per the email instructions. Well, we now have your username and password, and of course, we can do lots of things with that because we've gained access. When we do this, and we're working with customers to help them with this aspect in general, okay, this is just one example of many ways we can use this particular type of attack. It's a 50 to 75% compromise rate, so it's a pretty good hit rate. We usually fool 1 or 2 or 3 people when we blast this type of information out to a couple hundred employees in a VA pen test exercise. Okay? The next time around, though, if they've implemented controls and training and have awareness that's been raised throughout the organization to adopt a risk management culture, it drops down significantly, 5 to 25%. So we notice a huge dip in one of the most easily exploitable things there is, and that's social engineering. So I'm going to draw this one out. We've talked about these 3 aspects of common exploits because they still are very, very common. They're exploitable, and they are easy to use as a weapon against organizations. Okay? The password deficiencies, the web vulnerabilities, and the social engineering are still very current. They're still ranked up there with #1 and #2 exploits for various organizations, SANS, TrustWave, Symantec, Microsoft, and others. Still rank those as the most common levels of exploits. And as you can see on the left, those organizations made news, unfortunately, because of 1 or 2 or a combination of these types of common exploits. Okay? So we got some low-hanging fruit that we can take care of. What we're seeing as a trend moving forward into the future are definitely going to be an increase in that social engineering attacks. Again, we're always going to be the weak link in the chain, and there are various ways of actually addressing that through training and awareness and repeating that over and over and over again. Okay? We're forgetful as well, so we need to be reminded constantly. Okay? Mobile malware, as mobile technologies and devices and platforms increase, so shall the mobile malware and exploits as well. Bigger targets, they're eventually going to have malware advancements directed towards them. Cloud storage attacks, we all know that the cloud literally isn't this ether that's floating up in the air. It's owned by some organization. It's a physical data center that you could drive to and see it and touch it. Okay? Cloud just gives it a nice kitschy name. The problem with that is it's just somebody else's data center, and it's prone to just as many exploits and attacks as your own. Okay? Cloud-based technologies are really taking off and advantageous because of the cost factor initially. Okay? It's a commodity. It significantly lowers costs for administration, for upkeep, and things of that nature. But it doesn't eliminate the risk vectors that come along with, a data center. You just move that problem from point A to point B. Third-party attacks, subcontractors, consultants, and vendors. Think about the organization that you work for and the number of contractors that you have assisting you in various projects, app development, offshoring things, calling on third parties and other areas of the organization to help you with parts of your business that you don't want to focus on primarily. Okay, there's a lot of risk that needs to be addressed there. They're being trusted in some cases with your intellectual property and your brand. And of course, browser-based vulnerabilities. That's the door that we use to get to those websites and everything else. Browser-based vulnerabilities are always going to be near the top, and they're going to be expanding considerably in the next several years as they have in the past. So what can we do? So let's talk about those three components: passwords, websites, and social engineering. Of course, we're talking about auditing the passwords, implementing two-factor. I mentioned that early on. It's cheap, effective. It deploys quickly. Okay, and it's something that you should all be considering if you haven't done it. That is, if you have any intellectual property worth protecting. Okay, doing REFER assessments. Okay, awareness and training, repeating that model, and you can see the others have similar kind of traits in developing life cycles and raising the levels of maturity. Processes and procedures need to be written. They need to be adhered to, and you need to implement the technologies that help you automate these things. That's the general message here. Okay, the social engineering. Specifically around awareness and training. It's harder to do because it's a soft skill. Generally it takes longer. You're dealing with people and not technology, and that's a little bit more difficult. You're dealing with schedules and downtime associated perhaps sometimes with that training. So there's a risk there, but it certainly outweighs the all of the other things, and the benefits are huge if you do it correctly. Security-minded organizations, when we work with them, you can literally feel it when you walk in the front door. You're being watched. You're not allowed to walk around. It's a very secure environment. They're very security-minded, and their risk tolerance is extremely high. So low, rather. Sorry. So having said all that, common exploits, certain things you can take away. Think about how your organization does what it does to guard against those common exploits. And it was rather technical, I understand. Those are certain things that we'd love to talk to you about into the future. That's going to be part of our next steps and follow-ups here individually with each of you, because we know your organizations are different. But I want to stick on a vein here of managing the risk. And a program that we developed several years ago, and it's evolved into a true risk management platform, okay, that addresses a lot of all the things we've talked about actually up till now, and a lot more that we haven't. So let's talk about the entire big picture. Again, we've only talked about the surface, right? Some of the common exploits, not all of them obviously, but some of the ones that are still there and have been for a long time. And some of the ones that are on the surface, we can all identify, right? Those are the easy ones. The ones we want to start talking about now, in addition to those on the surface, are what lies underneath, right? It's the things you don't see. It's the unplanned, unforeseen, how do I get more proactive versus reactive portion of what we're talking about here. Okay, it's the true risk management equation actually quantifies what we're talking about here. Okay, basically, this is the thing that provides that all-inclusive way to measure your organization's, quote-unquote risk, what you consider to be risk. Okay, it's an impact and a likelihood vector. So you multiply those two together, those quantifiable entities, and exponentially increase that over time. Okay, so it's kind of like the hockey stick measure, right? It starts off kind of shallow and then skyrockets. The longer you leave something alone, the more the exploitable risk portion of the equation increases. So it makes a lot of sense, but we're going to start breaking it down into this layered effect. We have that perimeter network endpoint application data diagram that I drew up early in the presentation, the one that looked like a rainbow, and then wrapping it with governance and operations is going to drastically impact this equation, and I'm going to show you how. Let's draw this one out here. We need to talk about costs. The whole process doesn't move forward or advance unless we actually address the financial side of things. How is this going to hit the bottom line? Yeah, I know you want to implement this true risk management framework, and it sounds great, but how's it going to save me money? How's it going to make me more operationally efficient? So we're going to talk about those here on this slide really quickly. First of all, start thinking about how you can do more with less, which is what we're all being asked to do more and more these days, okay? Multifunctional and integrated solutions, right? So not just one solution to do a thing. You're going to buy one solution that does many things. We're going to talk about those specifically here. Operationalizing costs versus just capital expenditure after capital expenditure after capital expenditure. It actually hits the bottom line in a slightly different way from an accounting perspective, and it's a good thing. So look at managed services. Look at not doing the things that you don't focus on as a core discipline in your organization, and outsourcing or getting managed services to help with the the commodities or that utility portion of IT management, security, and risk management. Consider that. Prioritizing your risks can be done through a control assessment or VA/pen test. Lots of different ways of actually prioritizing what's important. What's the highest level of risk, medium and low levels of risk, so you can actually start remediating in a controlled manner versus just shotgunning at everything and not tying together all the various aspects of the organization, specifically within IT, because there's typically a lot of silos where organizations, IT departments can't talk to each other efficiently. You have to have a way of doing that and implement that into your culture. That way you're always focused on just what the true high-risk components are versus 4 different high-level risk vectors at the same time. Leveraging what you have, obviously it's always nice to look and see, hey, did you know we have a tool or a solution or a process procedure that already does that? Let's put that into place or blow the dust off of it and really put it to good use. Eliminating that redundancy through those control mappings. We have a process specifically, for example, that's designed to look at all of the actual regulatory guidelines, frameworks, best practices your organization should be observing based on your industry, your risk tolerance, whether you're privately or publicly held, whether you're profit, nonprofit, the list goes on and on. We boil that down and we give you the controls, literally the things you should be doing from a risk management, IT security perspective, and only doing them one time. And then being able to measure your effectiveness against those controls. We have programs actually designed to do that instead of looking at the same controls in different ways and typically in a redundant fashion as well. It takes a lot of time and money and resources. Finally, enforcing good behaviors. That's all about training, right? So we want to train our staff, our employees, and our organization to be more risk-minded, more security-minded. That saves a lot of money. Okay? It's a little harder to measure the effectiveness of it, but we have ways also there, again, to help you measure the effectiveness of those. When we talk about a model that we've also designed that wraps around that, and it helps you find out where you're at in what we call the COMMIT model, from chaotic all the way around to transparent. And those bullet points on the right are the kind of the tenets or the domains that you need to focus on or look at, from policies all the way down to governance. You have to have those, and they need to be effectively implemented and written and enforced and measured at every step of the way. So we're trying to help you in this maturity model, find out where you're at and how to get to that next step and then the one beyond that, moving towards transparency. That's what this is all about. So I'm going to draw this up again real quick before we jump into the next portion of the presentation to show you guys, again, now that we've had a chance to go through some of this, we've only talked about the top part of that iceberg, right? Just the tip of this thing. There's so many more aspects of a risk management program. We're not obviously going to talk about every one of these. That's an ongoing program for risk management that we want to engage each of you individually on. But this is just a picture of all the things that CBI brings to the table. We can help you with every one of these. We have advanced security teams. We have other teams that are on the security, information management, security side of the fence that eventually address every one of these disciplines. And your organization's IT departments are going to have a lot of these, or at least consider how they're going to address these components and wrap it with governance and operations. So again, just keep you kind of top of mind with this particular slide. We're going to get back to that one. So breaking that down though, that outer layer at the top of that arc there, the topmost arc is that perimeter and network layers. Think about how you can or you have the ability to, or lack the ability perhaps, to effectively visualize and automate and improve at that layer, right? Finding exposures, discovering compliance gaps, and mapping that back to those controls that I mentioned in your guidelines and your frameworks for like everything from HIPAA to PCI, ISO, NIST, NERC, FERC, depending on your industry, there's hundreds of them, right? You need to be able to do that. And automating the ability to provide continuous monitoring, okay, all the time, every day, all day, and being able to boil those events and configuration parameters down to the point where you can effectively manage it with the resources you either have in-house or by off-siting that through a managed service and understanding the value of that and the cost associated with it. Finally, being able to improve that model, okay? Guiding that cost-effective mitigation. How do we fix things? Where do we start? How do we know what's high, medium, and low-level priority, okay? But it all happens at that perimeter and that network layer because it's that outer shell in your egg, that very first point of contact that you have with the outer world, and it's also where your doors are. So again, back to our common exploits. If we can get through that shell, the rest of it gets a little easier for us, and then exponentially easier over time. So it's a very important layer in your overall risk management infrastructure, and it's one that definitely needs to be monitored and improved on at all times. Getting down into the further layers, or that third arc on our diagram there, are the endpoints. We're talking about servers, laptops, desktops, mobile devices, everything that literally is at the end of the wire, okay, that we can actually look at as an asset or consider an asset. Okay, monitoring and managing them, and then of course reporting and doing analytics on those is important at this layer. Okay, identifying ways to reduce costs is always going to be important, but configuration monitoring, locking down the configurations and making sure that they don't deviate from your standard, okay, that you created. Okay, how do you do that? How do you ensure that's not floating around or, you know, changing over time in a way that increased levels of risk at that endpoint layer? Okay, and then reporting back, okay, in a meaningful way. It's not enough to just do it. You have to actually have ways of having eyes on and visibility on the problem or challenges when there is a configuration issue or there is a virus outbreak or some kind of you know, event that's spreading rapidly across your endpoints. Okay, they're all connected and they can talk to each other in most cases. So if one gets infected, you have to consider the fact that a lot of the other connected hosts and endpoints in the environment are also either infected or are about to become infected. Okay, it's kind of like the worst case scenario. Assume that it's going to happen and then work your way backwards from there. Okay, how do you relegate that? How do you segment your network? What does your zoning look like? Is it proper? All of those things. A lot of different things to talk about there in aspects of technology and automation that you need to bring to the table. Finally, getting a little bit deeper down, we're talking about applications. These are the actual things. We're getting closer to the most important aspect of everything, but applications are your way to manipulate data, create data, and generate intellectual property. Okay, it isn't the intellectual property itself, but it's the thing that allows you to generate it and manage it and look at it and share it in common formats. Okay, you need to be able to discover, assess, and improve your applications. Okay, their resiliency to attacks. You know, you think about all the vendors you have for every application that your organization comes in contact or uses. It's going to be a very large list, probably much larger than you think. Now think about all of the people who wrote the code that make up those applications. Now consider the fact that they're people. Okay, we make mistakes. We're not perfect. And there's going to be flawed applications all over the place. They're constantly needing upgrades and patches. There are exploits that exist in points of time for those applications. You need to be constantly vigilant at this layer. It's usually the hardest one because you're not in control of it. The vendors are in control of a lot of these aspects. But you have to have a way to protect yourself in the meantime between when you discover an exploit on an application until when it's actually patched or mitigated in some way. Think about those. Finally, the data. The thing that means the most. It's the thing that if we take it away, we have nothing to talk about here in presentations like this today, and your organization generally ceases to exist. It's that intellectual property, and again, that brand, and it's the thing at the core for which, you know, IT departments essentially are constructed in the first place. Okay, how do you access that data, or access that data rather, or assess and classify the data, and control rights management, backup and recovery of that data in case there is an emergency or some kind of event that would force you to, you know, invoke your disaster recovery plan and such. So automating the actual loss of intellectual property. How do you identify it and prevent that from happening in the first place? I don't want any of my intellectual property ever to fall into the hands of the individuals that I have not authorized to, you know, look at and use that information. Okay? I need a way to do that, and there are ways, obviously, of doing that. But do you have the ways of doing it right now within your organization? Do we encrypt? Do we do vulnerability scanning? And all the other good tenets for risk management at the data layer. That's a quick little tour of the detailed components and disciplines you need to have behind those layers in that model that we've introduced. All along the way, we've actually talked about the governance and operational side of things as well. I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions. All right, there I know. We're still doing pretty good. All right, moving on. Let's get some rubber on the road here. Enough of this, you know, theoretical stuff, right? Let's have some fun. Technical solutions. So when we've talked in the past about two-factor authentication, right, earlier on in the presentation, it was the very first thing that came up, and it's one of the things that we're going to continue talking about. Okay, a two-factor authentication model, obviously something you have physically on your person or have access to, and something you know. It's maybe it's part of your password, but not the entire thing. That's the traditional two-factor authentication. Been around long enough and mainstream enough to where we should all at least understand the concept, if not actually use those already in their organizations. Okay. Consider though how it's changing. The introduction of cloud technology, the fact that you don't physically own all of your systems, data, applications, and such. You should actually have a two-factor authentication that is cloud-friendly or cloud-based. Okay, should be hardware and software independent. I got a BlackBerry, I've got a Microsoft-based phone, I've got a Droid, I've got an iPhone, an iPad, a laptop, and the list goes on, and it's not going to shrink anytime soon. Everybody and their brother seems to be bringing a new phone and a new operating system to market, and it needs to be independent of that hardware and software layer to avoid you from the pain of having to re-implement, upgrade, or abandon vendors, and therefore the actual, the cost associated with that is basically the loss. So make sure it's flexible enough and agile enough to align with, those technologies and also your compliance mandates. Okay, some of them are, some of them aren't. Some are much better than others, so consider that in the two-factor authentication. Next one will be your file and host integrity. This is a very, very important part, and it traverses lots of different things. And the theory behind it basically is this. Everything from, let's say, your router, right? The outermost piece of equipment in your entire network that comes in contact first physically with a cable that comes in from the outside world, okay? The router all the way down to, or whatever that is in your network infrastructure, typically the router, I should say, all the way down through the core of your operating systems, your applications, and your network security layers, all the way down through to the data. The zeros and ones that we covet, right, the most. File and host integrity is a theory that applies to all those layers, meaning I've built a network. I own it. Okay, it should stay exactly the way that I set it. There's no reason for it to deviate unless there's an authorized change control process behind it. And therefore, the theory is that network would be many, many times more secure than a network that is not employing or deploying, rather, file and host integrity of some kind. Okay, it actually extends beyond file and host. It goes all the way to appliances like those routers and firewalls and switches, load balancers. Everything should be observing the file and host integrity type framework. I want it to stay exactly the way I want it to stay. Okay, and that's what this is all about. Okay, it should be flexible enough to apply to all those platforms. It should be, regardless of physical, vendor, operating system, you should have file and host integrity of some kind applied to it. Basically what we're trying to say here. It should also integrate to your IT governance, risk, and compliance technology so it can accurately report the risk associated with any deviations it detects at any one of those layers. Okay, and therefore be able to prioritize your internal resources or managed service providers' efforts to mitigate or remediate the risks that it's finding. Okay, it's a very important part of that. Real-time visibility and control into those compliance mandates is really what you're eventually looking for. Think of the file and host integrity technology as the working side of things, the eyes, the fingers, and the hands that manipulate and enforce everything that we want to have enforced. IT GRC, mentioned it a few times already. Some of these are modular, some of these are cloud-based, some of these are on-premise installations and solutions, but they should all have the ability to provide the following benefits and features. Okay, depending on your industry and a lot of other factors that I mentioned earlier, whether you're profit, non-profit, privately, publicly owned, and such, you're going to have different mandates, different hoops to jump through. Okay, as much as we like to kind of stay away from that side of things and IT in general, they are there and they will not be denied. They are going to drive a lot of what we do. In some cases, they provide the funding and the budgets that we so much need to further along IT projects. And it also is the conduit through which the technical side of the business and organization communicates through to executive management, to business owners, to managers, director-level individuals who are not technically minded. They don't want to know or need to know how the other stuff works. They just need to know, is it doing the things that we need to do to protect our level of governance, risk compliance, mandates, guidelines, so I don't get in hot water when there's an audit, for example. Okay, I need to be able to prove that, but I don't want to become a technologist, nor will I ever become one. So that's the roles GRC plays and how important it is to be able to evaluate all those things that change, translate that into risks and controls, and map those to the written policies and procedures your organization has. But the trickier part of things, but you have to have that in order to advance through that commit model that I showed earlier, from chaotic all the way around to transparent. You'll never get there without a GRC solution of some kind. Two major components to GRC. There's enterprise-wide governance, risk, compliance, and then there's more of a technical or IT governance, risk, and compliance. They can coexist as programs. Generally, they're managed by separate parts of the organization, but they need to communicate effectively to one another. So also keep that in mind. Endpoint protection, okay, and everything that it entails. Being able to protect and manage endpoints, like a laptop is a very good example. Obviously, it comes and goes, it travels, it's designed to be mobile, and therefore its risk vectors are much larger than those assets like a desktop computer, which stays in your building all the time, every day. It's a little bit more of a trickier proposition to manage from an endpoint protection perspective. But the good benefits and features that you need are listed here. Okay, it's scalable, minimal impact to end users. You shouldn't even know it's there, basically, if it's doing this job appropriately. But it's also enforcing all of the policies for endpoint protection and security that you want to have kind of enforced. So here's all the aspects of a good endpoint protection framework. So we got about 7 minutes left. I do want to leave a little extra time at the end here before we break, at the end of the presentation for Q&A, and then also want to discuss next steps. So data loss prevention. Okay, this is also another very important part. In my personal list of must-haves for risk management, it's definitely in the top 2. Data loss prevention. Simply stated, it is making sure that no data ever leaks out of the organization or falls into the hands of the individuals you don't want it to get into. Okay, and that's a tricky proposition because data in its many unstructured formats is hard to manage. It's like trying to hold water in your hands or nail Jello to the wall. There's a lot of other analogies, but it's hard as a concept to wrap your head around. But once you have a really good solution and a process and procedures and governance, it becomes one of the more valuable things in the organization because you can tap into it and provide information to other parts of the business that initially you probably never thought of. An example would be data classification. A data loss prevention program generally lends itself and is a strong supporter of a data classification process, meaning if you're a hospital or a bank or a law firm or manufacturing, whatever it is, you're going to have different types of data. You know, you might classify some of it as imaging data if you're a hospital, okay? All the images that we store from x-rays to MRIs and such, that's the type of information. That's a type of data. It's imaging data. Okay, there might be levels of classification underneath that, but you have that one major classification of data. Who should have access to all the images? Well, depends on what type of image it is. You know, is it radiology? Is it neurology? Is it cardiology? And then that would separate it out into the various divisions in there that are allowed to have access to that type of image on the screen, or be able to manipulate or read it or delete it or change it or send it on to someone else. Classification is an important part, it's a keystone, always has been, of effective IT management in general. Where's my data? How do I classify it? Well, DLP programs and those solutions that do these things help you along the way. They will reveal those types of data that they're discovering, where they're at, who has access to them, who's modifying them the most, who's sending them the most, where are they sending them to, and then the list goes on and on and on. It answers a lot of those questions that you might not even have thought to ask yet. Okay, and it's usually pretty revealing. But it prevents the leaking of any data based on content. An example would be, can Dan Gregory send, and I'll use my imaging example, an MRI scan of a patient's part of their body to another organization. Can I do that? Well, the answer might be no, absolutely not. Dan's not in the right domain. He's not in the right department. He hasn't been granted rights because that classification of data isn't something Dan should even have access to, let alone be able to email that, regardless of if it's encrypted or zipped up in a zip file or whatever. You should never have access to that in the first place. Well, DLP infrastructure is going to say that I can have access to that. I do actually have access to that right now, and that is incorrect. That's wrong. There's a violation of that security policy, and that will automatically and proactively flag the right individuals. Dan Gregory has access to this entire repository of MRI scan data, and he shouldn't. And you should do something about it because he's not classified in the organizational structure as being approved to access that information. So it brings visibility to a very tricky part of IT in risk management. So, last one, encryption. Been around for a very long time. It's often misunderstood. It's conceived to be expensive and complex, and it stops business processes, and so on and so forth. Encryption is becoming more and more and more part of the mainstream. Solutions are way more efficient than they used to be. The technology is much more friendly from an administrative perspective, and end users don't need to even know it's there. Okay, so we can now eliminate a lot of those grumblings that we used to hear and pushback when it comes to encryption. Okay, does it truly encrypt the data from end to end? Can it encrypt data at rest on my storage devices or on my laptops? Can it encrypt the data up to the point where I'm actually delivering to the intended recipient and beyond? Okay, does it have the ability to encrypt removable media, DVDs, USBs, things like that, external drives? And is it controllable via policies? Okay, who can encrypt, who can't encrypt? Who are you going to force to have their emails encrypted based on certain criteria? Dan Gregory can send an MRI, but only if it's encrypted and only if it's going to the following domains. Okay, he's only allowed to do it in those conditions. If not, then we'll encrypt it for him. Maybe he's forgetful and he forgot to automatically, click the button that's going to encrypt that email. Well, we can do that and integrate that in that contextually aware risk management model that we were talking about earlier. All these components should talk to each other. Okay, DLP should talk to encryption. Endpoint security should talk to your governance risk and compliance program. File and host integrity should also talk to inventory and asset management. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's like a web that you would need to weave, but they all need to talk to each other. So above and beyond all of these features and benefits, the bottom line one should say they should all integrate with each other rather, in a contextually aware risk management model. A little bit about some of the more common technical solutions that you should be looking at, considering, or maybe perhaps already have, but you are lacking some of those features and benefits that are going to allow you to expand and grow and manage it effectively, and also from a cost perspective as well, cost effectiveness. I want to kind of wind things down. We've got maybe 2 or 3 at the most more slides. I appreciate your time here again today. And talk about some of the services that I've already mentioned, but actually kind of quantify that. CBI has a program called True Risk Management Assessment. It's going to help ensure that you have compliance with the safeguards from both administrative, physical, and technical perspective. It's going to reveal where your intellectual property and client data is at risk. It's going to provide that prescriptive remediation and make recommendations, written prescriptive recommendations, exactly what we would do if we were you, the time to value that it will take to implement those, and the cost associated with those implementations in a phased approach. Okay, we're not just going to do an assessment and we're going to walk away and say good luck with this assessment. We're literally going to hold your hand through the entire process, or as much of it as you want us to. And of course, it's always going to leverage or observe, where appropriate, your industry's based frameworks, guidelines, standards, and such for all the following here that you see on the screen. And the list obviously is only partial; it goes on and on. But we're very good at doing that in our assessment processes. Okay, I want to talk about our next steps, and this really is that last slide around true risk management. It's broken down into various components, and it's meant to be kind of like a restaurant style. You pick and choose a la carte what you want. We have vulnerability assessments and pen tests. We have DLP risk assessments, a malicious activity assessment, which really is kind of unique in that it will find any endpoints that are already infected, what they're infected with. Are they trying to actually exfiltrate data from your infrastructure out to, out of the infrastructure to a website or to another location without your knowledge? But the malicious activity assessment is very revealing, along with the DLP risk assessment. Network assurance assessment, essentially we're making sure that the network layers and that perimeter layer are configured optimally, and wherever applicable that they're supporting your compliance mandates and regulatory controls. And then we finally have one that does all of it. It's the enterprise risk assessment. It's the full suite of true risk assessment programs that you see listed there above. And it is focused on admin, physical, and technical safeguards in the way that we present back our results. So it starts with needs analysis, scoping calls, demonstrations, pilots of technologies, and making recommendations, because we all know the organizations are unique and different from one another. But that's what we're going to do here in the next several days after the presentation is, hopefully reach out, make a personal touch or point of contact with you, and understand your organization's needs and requirements that much better. This is just an image that I put up to let you know we do have a methodology documented from beginning to end and how we actually implement these programs effectively for you, up to and including the sustainability of the programs through our managed services offerings too, so we can take on some of that burden for you at the end of the day. And I'll leave this up on the screen for food for thought, letting you know and reminding you what we do and the depth and breadth of our capabilities in all these various aspects for IT risk management. I want to thank you again all for your time. I've just checked and there are no hands up that I can see. So hopefully this was helpful and created some interesting conversation and more importantly some questions that maybe kind of got some ideas going for you and your organization. But looking forward to talking to you more down the road. And for now I'll say goodbye and again hopefully we'll be talking to you guys sometime soon. Bye.